Hello, this is Cho of the Shiny Colors Discord. Welcome to another episode of the Shiny Review. Today we've got 3 new cards to talk about. We have the new Produce SSR for Sakuya, Support SSR for Toru as part of Twilight's collection, and we have the 3rd PR support in Asahi. Keep in mind that Sakuya and Toru as part of Twilight's collection mean they are technically limited, but they return on any other Twilight banner. Asahi, on the other hand, is a true limited card, as we do not know when she will be rerunning. The difference is that her banner does last a lot longer than the average, a little under a month, so you still have some amount of time to pull for her even after this Twilight banner ends. Let's go ahead and get things started with Sakuya. Starting the next round of Twilight cards, Sakuya acts as yet another piece of Vocal Antika support. Sakuya's biggest benefit is the fact that she's a true all-rounder for the team, with the ability to scale or assist in scaling for every variant of a build you could think of. She can ignore interest while debuffing a judge with her initial appeal, act as a Daikichi Kogane with her second appeal, and becomes a heavy-hitting AoE attacker when maxed out. She's also a duet unit, something I could not really fit onto the slide, but she does have that as well, which is something that Vocal Antika specifically has been looking for a good minute. She has arguably the strongest memory appeal for Vocal Antika, but suffers in a similar way to a certain Kaho Produce SSR, in that her appeal applies a buff that directly contradicts the scaling of her Link appeal as a means to balance the card out. She's an extremely powerful card that has utility at all stages of the game, and will find a nice home in Antika for a good long while, and even other teams once you get that singular extra copy, giving her a very effective appeal, useful on any Vocal team. Her roles are center, maybe. I think there's a definite argument for and against. She's an attack all unit, she can buff, she has attention down, she has interest manipulation, she has duet, and I really highly recommend pulling for this Sakuya. If you are somebody that is just getting started with Vocal Antika, this card is a little funky to use, all things considered, which is maybe the biggest detracting point for her. But, on the flip side, she's such a powerful center that you could, in theory, build around her and make her one of the strongest cards you have available. So realistically, she's somewhere between high and very high, but I'm just going to go with the high recommendation here. Sakuya's initial appeal is a Vocal 3.5 that lowers the judge's interest by 50% for 2 turns. The plus appeal, which requires the full Antika lineup and for it to be turn 4 or later, is a Vocal 1.5 appeal that ignores interest. Her 1-star appeal is a Vocal 5.0 that raises your Vocal by 50% for 4 turns, lowers your attention by 50% for 4 turns, and duets randomly with Antika. The plus appeal requires the full Antika lineup and the turn count to be 3 or earlier, which lowers the judge's interest by 70% for 1 turn. Her 4-star appeal is a Vocal 1.1 to 5.5 to all judges that scales based on how low your attention is, and grants a Vocal 100% buff for 3 turns that links into, again, a Vocal 100% buff for 3 turns. As for her passives, her 1-star passive is a Vocal 50% up and attention 50% down that requires it to be turn 2 or earlier. It has a 30% chance to activate once, and this comes with a Vocal plus 150 uncap. At 2 stars, she gains a Vocal 120% up and attention 50% down passive that only requires 1 or more active attention down buffs to activate. It has a 30% chance to activate twice. This comes with a Vocal Dance Visual plus 100 uncap. Her 3-star passive is a Vocal 120% up and Memory Gauge 20% up if you are running the full Antika lineup and it's before turn 3. This has a 20% chance to activate twice and comes with a Mental plus 200 uncap. Finally, her Rainbow passive, which we'll get into a moment, comes with a Vocal Dance Visual plus 100 uncap, and her Memory appeal when maxed out is attention 50% up for 3 turns that links into a Vocal max 8.5 appeal that scales based on how low your attention is. Remember how I mentioned that there's a little bit of self-sabotage in there? That's exactly why. Said Rainbow passive is a Vocal 220% up if you have 4 or more Antika members in your skill history, and it has a 25% chance to activate twice and is limited to once per turn. Lastly, her Twilight passive, as part of the newest set, as it turns out, is a Memory Gauge gain of plus 10% to all members. As it turns out, Haruki was the last of the appeal plus Memory Gauge passive, as Sakuya starts a new variant that foregoes all damage in favor of a whopping 10% increase to your Memory Gauge gain. If your team has 0 trouble at dealing damage, or you feel like you're hitting a little too hard, which is making scoring harder, this passive is basically built for you. This will make the lower tension checks easier to make up for, and should add a nice injection of consistency for teams that have really looked for effects like this. Now, as for the usual shtick, Twilight's collection has not gotten any less expensive, so it's fair to consider that you may only have the Sakuya at 0 or 1 stars. Unironically, 1-star Sakuya, depending on how you end up playing her, is the highest you'd ever need her to be. While her passives beyond this are of course insane, many will find value in her 1-star appeal to be just enough if you don't plan on playing her in the vocal position. Being able to stall while also setting up Antika through buffing in a duet is more than enough as an early starter, and doesn't have to be much more than that. Being able to stall while also setting up Antika through buffing and a duet is more than enough as an early starter, and doesn't have to be much more than that. For the support recommendations, we've got a lot. We've been sampling a lot of different teams in the higher levels just to see what they've been using, and there's a pretty common consensus of the top 3, which is Twilight Kogane, Mermaid Mamimi, and Gap Mikoto. Unsurprisingly, Kogane pairs up extremely well with Sakuya both for her masteries and what her passives aim to do. Mermaid Mamimi is the ideal support partner for this Kogane in terms of masteries and passives, making them a near inseparable duo for builds when included. The rest can depend on your position and the goal for the team. She's builds are, unsurprisingly, very common, and are carried on the back of Mikoto's passive, which requires either 4 or more different units on the team, or exactly 1 unit on the team. This means that teams like Antika and Hokura can really use this Mikoto's passive in a great way, which is why you'll see her pop up on a lot of different builds. Nichika just so happens to have good masteries and solid passives that work kind of well with this Mikoto and with Antika, but mostly you use her for the masteries. Cards like Juri and Hinana are in a similar boat. Many of their passives aren't necessarily super useful for this team unless you're doing some slight alternative builds, but they have really good masteries and good stat uncap that allow for high level building. Meguru is a great vocal support in general because of her ability to slow down the pace of the match, which means that she's a great card to include if you're not using Sakuya as your vocal position. You get to essentially have 2 separate vocal appeals that function like a Daikichi Kogane, and are going to be very useful for you at keeping things at your pace. Finally, you have Twilight Yuika, who has been popping up here and there, sort of infrequently, who is mostly just a target for the unit mastery buffs that you're playing off of Kogane and Mamimi. So if you're already dedicated to an Antika engine, Yuika can just help make those cards particularly better, even at the cost of losing out on effectively a couple passives thanks to her being a dance support. Looking at the grades, Sakuya as a center earns an A- SS. Sakuya's memory appeal is a tricky thing to discuss, only because they already have an on-brand memory appeal with Kiriko that is a very similar concept. I think Sakuya's memory appeal would be arguably the best in the game, if not for the fact that it sabotages itself, and attention down, while becoming a little more common, is still not common enough to compensate for it. If you are able to fully spec into that attention down, this is easily one of the best things you can be doing as a center. But if that's not necessarily the build path you are trying to take, then she's just fine. As a unit, easy SS. I think it's fairly clear that Sakuya, when maxed out, is insanely competent, even if parts of her kit feel a little confused. The greatest advantage of her is her Daikichi-esque appeal at 1 star, allowing her to be placed on any position of your Antika team in a flexible manner. Because how each of her appeals function very differently, it means that she's able to play any position that you reasonably need her to be. If you're already using a card like My Songs Collection Kogane as your vocal position, you can use her as a utility card off stat. Or you can choose to use her as a center if you don't feel like using Twilight Kiriko, for example. Twilight has historically been very flexible, but this card is maybe the most flexible card we've seen just yet. Next then, we have Toru. Toru arrives as a visual Nocchill support, promoting a very similar set of skills compared to Twilight Juri from last round. Rather than focusing on SP, however, she promotes mental growth, and trades room mastery for perfect mastery. For some, this is great, for others, this is a little rough. This card is actually very nutty once we get into the passives and appeals, so I imagine that much like with the first Twilight support Kaho, we're going to be seeing a lot of Toru in visual builds going forward. You can either look forward to that, or dread it. Her support skills are Idol's Bond, Rest Boost, and Stamina Support, and she has 5 unique support skills. Unit Mastery Mental reaching plus 12 at level 65, Visual Stay Mastery reaching plus 5 at level 80, Unit Mastery Visual Limit Up reaching plus 7 at level 80, Visual Mastery Stamina reaching plus 6 at level 80, and Perfect Mastery reaching plus 8 at level 80. Her support appeal does scale, starting at a Visual 3.1 that grants a Visual 5% buff when she's level 60, and works her way up to a Visual 3.5 with a Visual 25% buff for 3 turns by level 80. Her TFD idea is mental, her insight token for grad is visual, and her proficiency and landing point is in mental. Toru's initial passive is a visual 60% up if it's turn 3 or earlier, and it has a 20% chance to activate twice. This comes with a visual plus 50 uncap. Her 1-star appeal is a visual 3.5 that raises your evasion by 20% for 3 turns, and also comes with a visual plus 50 uncap. Her 2-star passive is a visual 130% up that requires 1 or more active evasion up buffs. That means just by using her 1-star appeal, you have access to her 2-star passive. This has a 20% chance to activate twice, and comes with, again, a visual plus 50 uncap. Her 3-star appeal has a lot going on with it. It's a visual 5.0 that raises your visual by 50% for 4 turns per successful dodge. You get up to 3 stacks of this, and the time in which you can get this buff lasts for 4 turns. You also gain evasion 10% up for 5 turns. This also comes with a change appeal if you are running the full Nocchill lineup, which is an evasion 10% buff for 3 turns. This comes with a visual mental plus 75 uncap. Her 4-star passive is the Rainbow passive, a visual 200% up that requires 2 or more active evasion up buffs, and has a 30% chance to activate once, limited to once per turn, with that visual mental plus 75 uncap. Toru is kinda crazy when at full power. Otherwise, she's just kinda fine, so it's the usual Twilight situation of being a B+ with no extra copies, double S at her best. The same song and dance as every other Twilight support. Toru is a very capable support even at 2-star, making her a character that is consistent on any team running her alongside Creation Hinata, with easy access to evasion up buffs. Once she reaches 4 stars, she has what I would consider to be one of the easiest rainbow passives to work with, especially since Toru's final appeal can be changed on Nocchill teams to automatically have one of your 2 necessary buffs. Combine that with the Hinata previously mentioned, and you will have your 2 evasion buffs really fast. I have a feeling this card is going to see a lot of play going forward, and might mark a dramatic shift in what visual builds look like. Since we've had such a long run of visual Hokuto shells, now we can start shifting towards a visual Nocchill shell. Last then, we have Asahi. As part of the PR campaign that players got to vote on, our 3rd and final SSR for this batch is Asahi, being the dance card to Amana's visual and Kaho's vocal. Functionally, she's entirely identical to Kaho with just the attribute swap. That said, she gains 1 extra option in the form of supporting Dance Illumine. Since previously, Kaho only supported Stray Light and Hokura, this supports Stray Light, Hokura, and Illumine. There's a lot of open-ended potential for this Asahi to see play across these 3 teams, though Stray Light will probably reap the most immediate benefits. She's a good card for many aspiring dance teams. Her support skills include Idol's Bond, Promised Recovery, Rest Boost, and she has 4 unique support skills. Dance Mastery Dance, reaching plus 15 at level 75, Tension Mastery Dance Limit Up, reaching plus 4 at level 80, Dance Stay Mastery, reaching plus 5 at level 80, and Dance Mastery Stamina, reaching plus 5 at level 80. Her support appeal does scale starting at a Dance 3.0 once you get to level 60, becoming a Dance 3.5 by level 80. Her TFD idea, Insight Token for Grad, and Proficiency and Landing Point are all in Dance. Asahi's initial appeal is a Dance 2.5 that doubles your current Dance Up buffs, and grants you a Dance 20% buff for 4 turns. Remember that Dance 20% buff is not affected by this appeal's double up effect. The Fortify only applies to buffs you already had prior to appealing. Her 1-star passive is a Dance 50% up that requires a turn count of 3 or earlier, and has a 20% chance to activate 3 times. Her 2-star passive is a Dance 100% up and Memory Gauge 5% up that requires any combination or just having Meguru, Juri, or Asahi on the team. So you can have all 3 of them, 2 of them, or just 1 of them in order to activate the passive. It has a 30% chance to activate twice. She has 2 Dance plus 50 uncaps at 3 stars. At 4 stars, she has an appeal and a passive. Her appeal is a Dance 3.5 that doubles your current Dance Up status and grants a Dance 60% buff for 4 turns. The passive is a Dance 150% up that requires you to be in the dance position and has a 30% chance to activate twice. This comes with a Dance plus 100 uncap. Asahi earns an A+ to an S-. Asahi is more or less the exact same card we saw last month with Kaho, and even comes down to a similar decision thanks to Asahi having a majority of her supports be dance. Just like how Kaho has a bunch of vocal supports, Asahi has had a handful of good dance supports over the last couple years. Thankfully, her combination of passives and masteries makes this a much easier choice to make, especially since the last Asahi dance support was a pretty good while ago. She's a notable improvement to all 3 units she represents, and offers flexible build opportunities through both her 2-star and 4-star upgrades. I moderately to highly recommend pulling for this Asahi. So that will do it for the video today. Thank you so much, as always, for watching. Next time we'll be talking about whatever banner comes next, so let's look forward to it together. Till then, I've been Sho. Thank you again for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day.